The decision came down like a hammer. Not slowly. Not after days of deliberation and carefully worded statements and the kind of extended review process that professional sports leagues sometimes use to create the appearance of thoroughness. It came down fast. 15 minutes fast. And when it landed with the full weight of an institution that had watched something happen to its most important player and decided, with a clarity that left no room for interpretation, that it was not going to look the other way. Major League Baseball had seen enough. 2 Pittsburgh Pirates players suspended. The punishment handed down not at the end of a long week of review but within the same breath as the injury itself, as if the league had watched the footage once, looked at each other across the table, and arrived at the same conclusion simultaneously. Because that is what the footage showed. Not a collision. Not a competitive play that crossed a line in the heat of the moment. Something deliberate. Something targeted. Something that had a specific name on it. That name was Shohei Ohtani. And Major League Baseball was not going to pretend it was anything other than what it was. The game had started with the specific electricity that every Dodgers game carries when Ohtani is in the lineup. That particular quality of attention, the kind that makes 56,000 people sit slightly more forward in their seats, the kind that makes opposing managers look at their pitchers differently, the kind that has no real equivalent anywhere else in the sport right now, was present from the first inning. The Pirates had come in prepared. Or they had come in believing they were prepared, which is the version of preparation that sometimes leads people to make decisions they cannot take back. Because there is prepared for Shohei Ohtani, the baseball player, the hitter, the pitcher, the force of nature that has been dismantling opposing lineups for the better part of 2 seasons, and then there is something else. Something that certain players and certain organizations mistake for preparation but is actually something darker. What happened in that inning was the darker thing. The play unfolded quickly, the way violent moments in baseball always do, in a fraction of a second that takes hours to fully understand afterward. But the cameras caught it. Multiple angles. Multiple frames. And when those frames were slowed down and examined, they told a story that had no innocent interpretation available to it. The intent was visible. The choice was visible. The specific direction of that choice, toward Ohtani, toward the player the entire sport had organized itself around watching, was visible. Ohtani went down. The stadium made that sound. Inside the league offices, the response began before Ohtani had even reached the training room. That is not an exaggeration. That is the reality of what it means to be Shohei Ohtani in Major League Baseball in this moment. When he goes down, the reaction is not confined to the stadium where it happened. It moves through every layer of the sport simultaneously, through front offices, through broadcast networks, through the league's own leadership, because everyone understands instinctively that what happens to Ohtani does not stay local. It becomes the story. It becomes the conversation. It becomes the thing that the sport has to respond to in a way that reflects what the sport believes about itself. The emergency meeting was called immediately. 15 minutes. The Dodgers leadership, Dave Roberts, the GM, the medical staff with their initial reports, and above all of them the weight of what the footage had shown sitting in the middle of the table like something no one wanted to be the first to touch. But someone had to touch it. And when they did, the decision that followed was not complicated. The suspensions were announced before the day was over. Both players named. The league's statement used formal language, the kind of careful institutional prose that official announcements always use, but underneath the formality the message was unmistakable. What had been done was not a baseball play. It was not competitive aggression within the understood boundaries of the sport. It was a violent act directed at a specific individual, and the league was treating it exactly that way. The baseball world received the news the way it receives all significant news in the social media era, instantly and loudly and from every direction at once. But underneath the noise, underneath the immediate reactions and the hot takes and the clips being shared millions of times across every platform, there was something quieter. Something that felt, to the people paying close attention, like relief. Because the suspensions said something important. They said that the league had watched the same footage the rest of the world had watched and reached the same conclusion the rest of the world had reached. They said that the size of the name on the back of the jersey, even the size of the name Shohei Ohtani, does not change what the rules are and what the consequences are for breaking them deliberately and violently. They said that baseball was paying attention. That matters. In moments like this, it matters enormously. Dave Roberts walked into the press conference room and the air changed. It always changes when Roberts enters a room after something significant has happened, because Roberts has a specific quality that not every manager possesses, the ability to be completely honest about the weight of a moment without allowing that honesty to become a performance. He feels things and he says things, and the gap between those two actions is very small. Which means that when he sat down in front of the cameras and the microphones and the rows of reporters who had been waiting for him, everyone in the room understood immediately that what they were about to hear was not going to be carefully managed organizational language. It was going to be real. He began with Ohtani. Not with the suspensions. Not with the league's decision. With Ohtani. With the person. With the specific and obvious fact that a human being had been hurt deliberately during a baseball game, and that the human being in question was someone Roberts had watched work harder and prepare more thoroughly and compete more completely than almost anyone he had managed in a career that spans decades. His voice was steady. But steady in the way that things are steady when significant effort is being applied to keeping them that way. He said what happened was unacceptable. He used that word specifically and deliberately, not unfortunate, not regrettable, not any of the softer words that are available in moments like this when softer words would be easier. Unacceptable. The word of someone who has made a judgment and is not interested in walking it back. A reporter asked about the league's decision to suspend both players. Roberts nodded before the question was fully finished. He said the league got it right. He said it without hesitation, without the slight pause that indicates a person is choosing their words carefully. He said the league looked at the footage and made the correct call, and that he was grateful the response had been swift because swiftness in these moments is its own kind of statement. It tells the players across the entire league something important about where the lines are and what happens when they are crossed. Then came the question the room had been waiting for. A reporter near the front leaned forward slightly and asked Roberts to describe, not tactically, not organizationally, but honestly, what it felt like to watch Shohei Ohtani go down during a game. The room got very quiet. Roberts looked at the table for a moment. When he looked back up, something in his expression had shifted. The professional steadiness was still there. But underneath it, visible now in a way it hadn't been a moment before, was something more personal. Something that belonged not to the manager of the Los Angeles Dodgers but to a person who had spent a significant amount of time watching an extraordinary human being do extraordinary things, and who had just watched someone try to take that away. He said it was one of the worst moments he had experienced on a baseball field. He said it simply. Without dramatic inflection. The way people say true things. He said that when Ohtani went down, his first thought was not about the game. Not about the score or the inning or the tactical implications of losing his most important player. His first thought was about Shohei. About whether he was okay. About the person. He paused there. And then, quieter, he said something that the reporters in that room will probably remember for a long time. He said that Ohtani, lying in the training room waiting for the medical staff to complete their assessment, had asked about the bullpen. Had asked whether the guys coming in after him were ready. Had asked, in the specific and completely characteristic way of someone whose competitive instinct operates on a frequency most people cannot access, whether the team was going to be okay. Not whether he was going to be okay. Whether the team was going to be okay. The room absorbed that. The GM spoke after Roberts and his voice carried a different quality. Where Roberts had been personal, the GM was institutional, but institutional in the way of someone who genuinely believed in the institution, who felt the weight of what it meant to be responsible for protecting it. He talked about the suspensions. He said the organization had been in contact with the league throughout the day and that the communication had been clear and direct and resulted in a decision that the Dodgers fully supported. He talked about what the message needed to be, not just for this series, not just for this season, but for the sport broadly. That what happened to Ohtani could not be normalized. Could not be filed away as one of those things that happens in a physical sport. Had to be named for what it was and responded to accordingly. A reporter asked whether the organization was satisfied with the severity of the punishment. The GM was quiet for a moment. He said the suspensions were appropriate. He said the league had acted correctly and with appropriate urgency. Then he paused in a way that suggested the next sentence was one he had been deciding whether to say. He said that no suspension changes what happened on that field today. That the outcome of any disciplinary process exists in a different category than the moment itself. That somewhere inside this building, Shohei Ohtani was dealing with an injury that would not have happened if two players had made a different choice. He left that there. He didn't add anything to soften it. By the time the press conferences ended, the baseball world had already begun its long, loud argument about what it all meant. About the suspensions and whether they were enough. About the culture of the sport and where the lines should be and how those lines get enforced. About Ohtani's timeline and the Dodgers roster and the competitive implications of losing the best player in baseball for any amount of time. All of that is real. All of that matters. But underneath all of it, persisting quietly through every argument and every reaction and every clip being watched by millions of people who may or may not follow baseball in their daily lives, was something simpler. A man had been hurt deliberately. The sport had responded. And the man, lying on a training table surrounded by medical staff, had asked whether his teammates were going to be okay. There are rules written in rulebooks. There are penalties handed down by league offices. There are press conferences and statements and suspensions and all the formal machinery of a professional sports organization responding to a crisis.